10 Golden Age stars whose wives always cheated on them. Hollywood's Golden Age wasn't just golden on screen. Behind those perfect publicity shots and glamorous premieres lurked a world of betrayal that studio fixers worked overtime to hide from the public. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on Hollywood's most explosive secret, the leading men who conquered the box office while losing the battle at home. The stars you idolized, the men millions of women fantasized about, were often going home to wives who were secretly stepping out on them. These weren't just random affairs. They were calculated betrayals that left Hollywood's biggest names emotionally shattered while they kept smiling for the cameras. What you're about to discover isn't in the authorized biographies. This is the raw, unfiltered truth about 10 Golden Age icons whose private lives were nothing like the romantic ideals they portrayed on screen. And the most shocking part? Some of these legendary men never even knew the full extent of their humiliation until decades later.
I suppose you didn't hear her say anything either.
Well, you see, I was kind of tired and I wasn't paying much attention.
Why don't you all?
1. Humphrey Bogart, the tough guy who couldn't tame his sluggy wife. Long before Humphrey Bogart found lasting love with Lauren Bacall, America's favorite tough guy was trapped in a marriage that could have been scripted by the writers of his darkest film noirs. His third wife, Mayo Method, wasn't just difficult, she was legendary for her volatility, earning the nickname Sluggy for her tendency to become physically violent during their epic, alcohol-fueled arguments. While Bogey lit up the screen, his wife lit matches at home, and rumors say she wasn't lighting them alone. Their Holmby Hills estate became known around Hollywood as Sluggy Hollow, an ironic twist on the idyllic-sounding Sleepy Hollow. Witnesses reported seeing broken dishes, shattered glass, and even furniture thrown from windows during their legendary battles. What few people realized was that Method's legendary jealousy wasn't just paranoia, it was classic projection. According to multiple sources close to the couple, including servants and neighbors, Mayo entertained numerous visitors when Bogart was filming or promoting his movies. There was a particular delivery man who seemed to need an awful lot of time to drop off packages, noted one neighbor. Sometimes he'd arrive minutes after Bogey left and wouldn't leave until just before he was due home. Bogart suspected these betrayals, but found himself in an impossible position. Male stars of the era were expected to control their households, and admitting his wife's infidelity would have been seen as a humiliating failure of masculinity, potentially damaging to his tough guy image. Perhaps most ironically, Method's jealous rages about Bogart's potential affairs increased in direct proportion to her own indiscretions. During the filming of Casablanca, when Bogart was working long hours, Mayo's visitors reportedly became even more frequent. Their marriage finally ended in 1945 when Bogart fell in love with his young to-have and have-not co-star Lauren Bacall. While this relationship is often portrayed as Bogart leaving his troubled wife for a younger woman, insiders suggest a different narrative. Bogart finally found the courage to leave a destructive marriage after years of quiet humiliation.
Honey, it's buenos dias, madre.
I don't think that's very nice, making fun of my Spanish.
2. Desi Arnaz, when Lucy decided two could play that game. America's favorite redhead and her Cuban bandleader husband presented the perfect picture of matrimonial comedy on I Love Lucy. Their on-screen chemistry captivated audiences, making them television's first superstar couple. But behind the scenes lurked a marriage riddled with infidelity, and not just from the notorious Desi. They both stepped out, but Lucy knew how to do it without getting caught. Desi Arnaz's womanizing was Hollywood's worst-kept secret. His infidelities were so numerous and flagrant that even studio publicists struggled to contain the stories. From chorus girls to prostitutes, Arnaz seemed incapable of fidelity, often not even attempting to hide his betrayals. Desi wouldn't just cheat, he'd do it in public places where he was certain to be recognized, revealed one CBS executive. It was as if he wanted Lucy to find out. For years, the narrative centered exclusively on Desi's betrayals and Lucy's patience. But recently uncovered accounts suggest a more complex reality. Lucille Ball eventually began having affairs of her own, not out of a desire to find new love, but as a calculated response to Desi's ongoing humiliation of her. It was a form of emotional survival for her, explained one longtime friend. After years of public humiliation, she decided that what was good for the goose was good for the gander. But unlike Desi, she was brilliant about keeping it quiet. While Desi conducted his affairs with reckless abandon, Lucy was strategic and discreet. she reportedly developed close relationships with at least 2 of her co-stars, always being careful to maintain plausible deniability. Lucy was a genius about protecting her image, said a former studio publicity agent. She understood that while audiences might forgive Desi for his indiscretions, they would never forgive her if she was caught doing the same thing. What made this situation particularly poignant was that despite their mutual infidelities, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz genuinely loved each other. Their passionate connection never fully disappeared, even after their divorce in 1960. They couldn't live with each other, but they never really moved on emotionally, observed one longtime family friend. Even after both remarried, there was always this current between them.
Clark Gable and Carol Lombard returned from Kingman, Arizona as Mr. and Mrs. Clark Gable. But even a girl like this thinks he's wonderful.
3. Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood, dethroned at home. Clark Gable, the dashing star who made women swoon as Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, was Hollywood royalty in every sense. Dubbed the King of Hollywood, Gable's masculine appeal made him the industry's most bankable leading man for decades. But before finding happiness with comedy queen Carol Lombard, Gable's earlier marriages revealed a man who wasn't always king of his own castle. Hollywood's king wasn't always in charge at home. Gable's first 2 marriages, to Josephine Dillon and Maria Langham, have long been subjects of curiosity. Both women were significantly older than Gable, Dillon by 17 years and Langham by 11, and both were wealthy, cultured women who helped transform the rough-around-the-edges young actor into the sophisticated star he would become. Josephine treated him more like a project than a husband, revealed one MGM colleague. She refined his speech, paid for his dental work, guided his career, but she also kept him on a very tight leash, financially and socially. This control reportedly extended to Josephine maintaining her own independent social life, which several sources suggest included relationships with other men. Given the significant age gap, some historians believe their marriage may have been more of a business arrangement than a romantic partnership. There were definitely men who visited Josephine when Clark was away on location or at studio events, claimed one neighbor. Whether these were romantic entanglements or just social visits was never clear, but the frequency and timing raised eyebrows. Gable's second marriage to Maria Langham followed a similar pattern. Another older, wealthy woman, Langham provided Gable with stability and social connections. But again, sources suggest that Maria maintained relationships with other men, particularly when Gable's rising fame began keeping him away from home. Maria had a particular friend, a European gentleman, who seemed to appear whenever Clark was away, noted one Hollywood hostess. They were very comfortable together, in a way that suggested a long-standing intimacy. This changed dramatically when Gable met and fell in love with actress Carol Lombard. With Lombard, a successful actress who was closer to his own age, Gable finally experienced a partnership of equals built on genuine passion rather than convenience or career advancement. With Carol, he was a different man, observed one studio insider. For the first time, he seemed truly in love rather than just playing a part in someone else's production.
But you were working like a convict in a granite quarry, weren't you?
I chose to do it.
Why?
Don't you know?
4. Gary Cooper, The Gentleman's Agreement. Gary Cooper embodied American values on screen. Integrity, straightforwardness, and moral clarity defined his most famous roles. But off-screen, Cooper's 28-year marriage to socialite Veronica Balfe, known as Rocky, operated under principles that would have shocked his fans. A sophisticated arrangement that both parties understood but never publicly acknowledged. They had a silent agreement. Don't embarrass each other, just don't get caught. Cooper's affairs were legendary in Hollywood circles. His romances with co-stars including Grace Kelly, Patricia Neal, and Ingrid Bergman were poorly kept secrets. But what remained hidden from public knowledge was Rocky's response to her husband's wandering eye. She eventually established her own discreet relationships. Rocky wasn't naive, explained one longtime family friend. She came from high society where marriages like theirs were common. The only rule was absolute discretion and maintaining the public facade of the perfect marriage. According to sources from their social circle, Rocky began having her own well-behaved flings after about a decade of marriage, once she realized that Cooper's infidelities were a permanent feature of their relationship. She was much too sophisticated to create scenes or ultimatums, noted a society hostess. Instead, she simply began cultivating relationships with intelligent, discreet men, usually from her East Coast social circle rather than Hollywood types. What makes this arrangement particularly interesting is that it wasn't born of indifference. By all accounts, Cooper and Rocky maintained genuine affection for each other throughout their marriage. They raised their daughter Maria together, maintained a united public front, and even seemed to enjoy each other's company. They had an unusual bond, observed one frequent guest at their home. They could be in a room full of people, and you'd still feel this connection between them, a private understanding that no one else was privy to. This unspoken arrangement became strained only once, when Cooper's 3-year affair with Patricia Neal became so intense that it threatened to destroy both the public facade and their private understanding. During this period, Cooper actually moved out of the family home, and divorce seemed imminent. "That was the one time Rocky drew a line," said a friend. Affairs were acceptable within their arrangement, but falling in love was not. Ultimately, Cooper ended the relationship with Neal and returned to his marriage. Whether this was due to his enduring feelings for Rocky, concern about scandal damaging his career, or simply a recognition that their arrangement offered the stability he needed, remains a subject of debate.
Mr. Lewis B. Mayor, thank you very much.
5. Mickey Rooney, the star who couldn't keep a wife loyal. Mickey Rooney dominated the box office in the late 1930s and early 1940s, his boyish charm making him America's most beloved young star. But off-screen, Rooney's romantic life was a spectacular disaster, a series of 8 marriages marked by betrayal and heartbreak that stood in stark contrast to the wholesome Andy Hardy character that made him famous. He could charm America, but couldn't keep a wife loyal for more than a year. Rooney's first marriage to Hollywood bombshell Ava Gardner in 1942 set the pattern that would repeat throughout his life. Despite his stardom, Rooney, standing just 5 feet 2 inches, often seemed to pursue women who towered over him both physically and in terms of beauty. Mickey pursued Ava with the same energy he brought to his performances, recalled one MGM colleague. Gifts, attention, grand gestures, he overwhelmed her. But once they were married, that energy went elsewhere. Back to the studio, to other women, to gambling and nightlife. According to accounts, Gardner quickly became disillusioned with Rooney's absences and rumored infidelities. What's less known is that she allegedly began her own affair with billionaire Howard Hughes during the latter part of their marriage. When she realized Mickey was seeing other women, she accepted Hughes's persistent attention, said one Hollywood hostess. Mickey was so busy with his own adventures that he didn't notice until someone from the studio tipped him off. This pattern, Rooney's wandering eye followed by his wife's retaliatory affairs, would repeat throughout his romantic history. His second wife, Betty Jane Phillips, reportedly began a relationship with a musician after discovering Rooney's multiple infidelities. His third wife, Martha Vickers, allegedly became involved with a director while married to Rooney. What makes Rooney's situation particularly ironic is that while he initiated the pattern of infidelity in most of his marriages, he reacted with righteous indignation when his wives eventually reciprocated. Despite his own rampant cheating, Rooney expected complete loyalty from his spouses. He would explode with jealousy at the slightest hint his wives were straying, recalled one MGM insider. This from a man who couldn't go a week without chasing a new showgirl. The double standard was breathtaking. By his 5th marriage, his reputation was so established that the pattern accelerated. Wives began looking elsewhere sooner, sometimes after just months of marriage. People would literally take bets on how long it would be before reports emerged of either Mickey or his new wife being seen around town with someone else, said one industry veteran.
You look like, standing there in the moonlight, a picture I once saw in Florence.
6. Errol Flynn. When two cheaters share a mansion. Errol Flynn swashbuckled his way into Hollywood history with his dashing looks and irresistible charisma. His adventures on screen made him the definitive action star of his era. But off-screen, Flynn's first marriage to French actress Lily Demita created a volatile household where marital fidelity was perhaps the only adventure neither party was interested in pursuing. 2 cheaters, 1 mansion, and a sword collection in between. Flynn's reputation as a womanizer is well documented. His famous declaration, "I like my whiskey old and my women young," reflected an approach to life built around pleasure-seeking. What's less commonly discussed is that in Lily Demita, he met a woman whose approach to fidelity was every bit as casual as his own. Lily was already a sophisticated European star when she met Errol, explained one Hollywood veteran. When she married Flynn, nobody who knew her expected monogamy to be part of the arrangement, including Flynn himself. According to accounts from their social circle, the Flynn-Demita marriage operated on an unspoken understanding. Both were free to pursue other interests as long as a certain degree of discretion was maintained. What made their situation unusual was the openness with which they sometimes acknowledged each other's infidelities. They would occasionally throw lavish parties at their Mulholland Drive estate, recalled one frequent guest. Errol would be openly flirting with starlets in one room, while Lily entertained her own admirers in another. There was this surreal quality to these events, like everyone was participating in an elaborate charade. This unusual dynamic created a household atmosphere that visitors found both fascinating and unsettling. The Flynns maintained separate bedrooms connected by a sitting room. According to household staff, these rooms would sometimes be occupied by visitors who were clearly more than casual guests. It was like they were running parallel lives under the same roof, observed one employee. They shared the public portions of the house, but maintained entirely separate private spaces and schedules. What complicated this arrangement was that despite their mutual infidelities, Flynn and Demita appeared to maintain a passionate, if turbulent, connection to each other. Their arguments were legendary in Hollywood, with both parties displaying volcanic tempers. They didn't just argue, they performed their arguments, said one neighbor, shouting in multiple languages, throwing valuable objects, threatening grand gestures like murder. Then, just as suddenly, they would reconcile with equal drama and intensity. Their marriage finally ended in 1942, after 6 turbulent years. While Flynn's infidelities were certainly factors in the dissolution, friends suggested that the relationship had simply exhausted both parties. The constant drama and jealousies had created a situation that even these two exceptionally vital personalities could no longer sustain.
What's the matter, medicine man? Throw section hand, I've had you.
7. William Holden, the golden boy who met his match. William Holden epitomized Hollywood's ideal of the all-American leading man, handsome, charming, and radiating masculine appeal. His performances in classics like Sunset Boulevard and The Bridge on the River Kwai established him as one of the industry's most respected actors. But behind his golden boy image lay a complicated marriage to actress Brenda Marshall that defied the simplistic narratives Hollywood preferred. Hollywood's golden boy met his match behind closed doors. Holden's marriage to Marshall lasted from 1941 to 1971, an eternity by Hollywood standards. The longevity of their union led many to assume they had achieved that rarest of Hollywood accomplishments, a stable, traditional marriage. The reality was far more complex. Bill's infidelities were legendary around town, revealed one colleague. His affairs with co-stars like Grace Kelly and Audrey Hepburn weren't even particularly discreet. He had this incredible charm that women couldn't resist. What's less known is how Brenda Marshall responded to her husband's continuous infidelities. Rather than playing the role of the long-suffering wife, Marshall eventually developed her own independent emotional life. Brenda was nobody's fool, explained one family friend. After the first few years and countless infidelities, she made a calculated decision. She would maintain the marriage and family life they had built together, but she would also quietly seek emotional fulfillment elsewhere. According to sources from their social circle, Marshall developed several close relationships with men who provided the emotional attention that Holden's constant absences and affairs left lacking. These relationships were conducted with extreme discretion, far more carefully managed than Holden's often public dalliances. She entertained certain gentleman friends when Bill was away on location, noted a neighbor. These weren't flamboyant affairs, they were quiet, dignified relationships with intelligent, cultured men who treated her with the respect she deserved. This arrangement created an unusual household dynamic. Holden would return home from his various location shoots and affairs, and the couple would seamlessly resume their public role as a devoted Hollywood couple. They raised their children together, maintained an active social life, and presented every appearance of a successful marriage. They had an unspoken agreement, said one close family friend. When Bill was home, he was fully present as a husband and father. Brenda never confronted him about his affairs, and he pretended not to notice her special friendships. Despite the unconventional nature of their marriage, those close to them insisted that Holden and Marshall maintained genuine affection and respect for each other throughout most of their 30-year union. Their arrangement seemed less about passion and more about practicality. Two intelligent adults who had found a way to accommodate each other's needs while preserving the family structure.
We've never planned anything, everything has always been somewhat spontaneous and I just let it happen.
8. Tony Curtis, the Hollywood heartbreaker who got a taste of his own medicine. Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh were Hollywood's dream couple, young, gorgeous, and photogenic. They epitomized the glamorous ideal of showbiz marriage in the 1950s. But behind this carefully constructed facade lay a more complicated reality, where Curtis's notorious womanizing eventually triggered responses from Leigh that few outside their inner circle ever suspected. He was busy chasing blondes. She was busy making sure she wasn't one of them. Curtis's reputation as a Hollywood Lothario was well established even before his marriage to Leigh in 1951. His marriage to Leigh, while based on genuine attraction, did little to curb these appetites. Tony never stopped being a kid in a candy store, recalled one fellow actor. Marriage was just a piece of paper to him. It didn't change his behavior at all. If anything, becoming half of Hollywood's golden couple just made him more attractive to women. Curtis's infidelities weren't occasional indiscretions, but a consistent pattern. From co-stars to extras, from Hollywood parties to location shoots, Curtis pursued women with an enthusiasm that became legendary in industry circles. He wasn't even particularly discreet, noted one studio insider. Everyone knew what was happening except the general public, who continued to believe in the perfect marriage being sold to them in fan magazines. What's less known is how Janet Leigh responded to her husband's constant betrayals. The public narrative has typically cast her as the loyal, suffering wife. But according to those close to the couple, Leigh's response was more complex and proactive. Janet was nobody's victim, insisted one friend. When it became clear that Tony's behavior wasn't going to change, she began establishing her own connections outside the marriage. These connections, according to multiple sources, included emotional attachments to several of her co-stars and at least one director. Unlike Curtis's often physical and fleeting encounters, Leigh's relationships tended to be more substantive, built around intellectual and emotional compatibility. Janet was selective and discreet, explained someone who worked with her on multiple films. She formed bonds with men who offered the emotional support and respect that Tony's immaturity couldn't provide. This created an unusual dynamic within their marriage. Curtis pursued his conquests openly and impulsively, while Leigh developed deeper but more carefully guarded connections. Those in their social circle noted the irony. Curtis's behavior was more obvious, but ultimately less threatening to the marriage than Leigh's more meaningful attachments. The marriage finally ended in 1962, after 11 years. While Curtis's infidelities were the official cause, those close to them suggested that the real breaking point came when Leigh formed an emotional attachment that made the emptiness of her marriage impossible to ignore any longer.
That's a very nice way to make money.
Well, heck, boat people's got to eat too, ain't they? Business fell off something terrible for a while.
9. Robert Walker, the devastated star left behind. Robert Walker achieved fame portraying sensitive, vulnerable young men before delivering his masterful performance as the psychopathic Bruno Anthony in Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. But Walker's most painful role was one he never chose. The devastated husband left behind when his wife, Jennifer Jones, began a very public affair with powerful producer David O. Selznick. She didn't cheat in secret. She left him for the most powerful man in Hollywood. Walker and Jones, then known as Phyllis Isley, met as young acting students, married in 1939, and headed to Hollywood together. Initially, Walker found more success, securing a contract with MGM, while Jones struggled to find meaningful roles. Everything changed in 1941 when Jones auditioned for producer David O. Selznick, one of the most powerful figures in Hollywood. Selznick was immediately captivated, not just by Jones's acting potential, but by the young actress herself. He signed her to a personal contract, changed her name to Jennifer Jones, and began meticulously crafting both her career and public image. Selznick's interest wasn't just professional from the very beginning, revealed one former employee. Everyone in his organization could see that he was infatuated with her. As Selznick's professional attention helped Jones's career flourish, culminating in her Academy Award-winning performance in The Song of Bernadette, 1943, his personal attention intensified as well. Their professional relationship evolved into a romantic one by 1942, while Jones was still married to Walker. There was no attempt to hide what was happening, recalled one MGM staff member. Selznick would send his car for her daily, have flowers delivered to her constantly, and they would be seen together at restaurants and functions. It was the most public secret affair in Hollywood. What made this situation particularly painful for Walker was his complete powerlessness. As an actor under contract to MGM, he couldn't directly challenge Selznick, who wielded enormous influence throughout the industry. Moreover, Selznick was actively advancing Jones's career, while Walker's professional future could be destroyed with a single phone call. Robert was in an impossible position, explained a friend. The man who was taking his wife was the same man who could end his career with a word. He had to watch this affair unfold in front of the entire industry while maintaining enough professional composure to continue working. Walker's response to this humiliation revealed both his vulnerability and self-destructive tendencies. Never emotionally robust, he began drinking heavily, a habit that would eventually contribute to his premature death. His behavior became increasingly erratic, leading to embarrassing public incidents and professional difficulties. Jones filed for divorce in 1945, officially ending a marriage that had effectively been over since Selznick entered the picture. She married Selznick in 1949 after his own divorce was finalized. For Walker, the aftermath was devastating. Beyond the personal humiliation, he lost regular access to his two sons with Jones, as they began living primarily with their mother and Selznick. Despite these personal struggles, Walker experienced a professional renaissance in the early 1950s with his brilliant performance in Strangers on a Train, 1951. Tragically, he died shortly after completing the film, suffering a fatal reaction to prescription sedatives combined with alcohol. He was just 32 years old.
George Sanders and all about Eve.
This is George Sanders.
10. George Sanders, the cynical star cuckolded by Zaza. George Sanders built his career playing sophisticated, cynical characters who viewed the world with a sardonic detachment. With his cultured British accent and air of world-weary experience, Sanders specialized in portraying men who were too intelligent to be fooled by anyone. The tragic irony is that in his personal life, Sanders found himself married to one of Hollywood's most notoriously unfaithful women, the glamorous Hungarian actress Zsa Gabor. George gave her diamonds. She gave her attention to literally everyone else. Sanders and Gabor married in 1949, bringing together two of Hollywood's most distinctive personalities. Sanders, known for his biting wit and intellectual demeanor, seemed an unlikely match for the flamboyant, attention-seeking Gabor. Friends questioned the pairing from the start, wondering what the cerebral Sanders saw in the publicity-hungry actress beyond her obvious physical charms. George was absolutely besotted with her initially, recalled one friend. She represented everything he wasn't. Spontaneous, emotionally expressive, uninhibited. He found her endlessly fascinating, like some exotic creature he'd discovered and couldn't quite categorize. That fascination soon turned to disillusionment as Gabor's penchant for male attention became increasingly obvious. Unlike most Hollywood wives who maintained at least a pretense of fidelity, Gabor made little effort to conceal her wandering eye and hands. Zsa would flirt with other men right in front of George, revealed one frequent dinner guest. Not just casual flirtation, but overtly suggestive behavior, touching, whispering, making plans within earshot of her husband. She seemed to enjoy his discomfort, almost as if she were testing how much he would tolerate. According to multiple sources, Gabor's behavior went well beyond flirtation. She allegedly conducted numerous affairs during their marriage, including a widely rumored liaison with Dominican playboy and diplomat Porfirio Rubirosa, and even a brief fling with Frank Sinatra. She had a particular fondness for powerful, virile men who represented a stark contrast to the cerebral Sanders, noted one Hollywood socialite. She pursued them openly, as if daring George to object. When he eventually did, she would dismiss his concerns with a laugh and a wave of her hand, as if his jealousy was an amusing quirk rather than a legitimate grievance. What made this situation particularly humiliating for Sanders was how public Gabor's indiscretions became. Her liaisons were reported in gossip columns and discussed openly at industry gatherings. Sanders, a man who valued his dignity and public image, found himself increasingly portrayed as the cuckolded husband, a role completely at odds with the commanding, unflappable characters he played on screen. For a man like George, the public humiliation was far worse than the actual infidelity, observed one colleague. He could perhaps have tolerated Zaza's affairs had she been discreet, but she seemed to revel in the attention her behavior generated without any concern for how it affected him. Sanders's response to this situation revealed the complex psychology of a man torn between his pride and his persistent fascination with his wayward wife. Rather than immediately ending the marriage, He alternated between cold withdrawal and desperate attempts to win back Gabor's exclusive attention. He would shower her with expensive gifts, jewelry, furs, even a Mercedes convertible, in what seemed like attempts to compete with her other admirers, said one friend of the couple. Then, when these gestures failed to change her behavior, he would retreat into icy sarcasm and pointed public remarks about fidelity and dignity. This painful dynamic continued for approximately 5 years before Sanders finally filed for divorce in 1954. In his divorce filing, he cited extreme cruelty, a legal euphemism that barely hinted at the public humiliation he had endured throughout their marriage. After their divorce, Gabor went on to marry 5 more times, while Sanders married 3 more times, including a brief, ill-fated union with Zaza's sister Magda. This strange choice led many to wonder if Sanders had ever fully extricated himself from the emotional web of his relationship with Zaza. Sanders's experience with Gabor seemed to deepen the cynicism that had always been part of his persona. In his later years, he became increasingly bitter about relationships and marriage, often making caustic public statements that echoed the disillusioned characters he portrayed on screen. Tragically, this cynicism may have contributed to his eventual death in 1972. His infamous death note, "Dear world, I am leaving because I am bored," reflected the profound disillusionment of a man who had seen through the pretensions of Hollywood romance both on and off screen. Hollywood's golden age created magnificent illusions on screen. Romance, devotion, and fidelity were portrayed as the norm. But behind the cameras, many of cinema's most iconic leading men were experiencing a very different reality. While their fans imagined them as the ultimate romantic prizes, these stars often returned home to wives who sought fulfillment elsewhere. What makes these stories particularly poignant is the gap between public perception and private reality. The very men whose careers depended on projecting images of masculine appeal and romantic dominance were, in their private lives, experiencing betrayal and humiliation they could never publicly acknowledge. For some, like Bogart and Gable, these early experiences of marital infidelity eventually gave way to genuine, lasting love in later marriages. For others, like Walker and Sanders, the psychological damage never fully healed, contributing to tragic endings. And for stars like Cooper and Holden, complex marital arrangements evolved that accommodated both partners' needs while maintaining the all-important public facade. These stories remind us that behind Hollywood's perfectly crafted images lay genuine human experiences, complicated, messy, and often heartbreaking. The leading men who made millions of viewers swoon were, in their private moments, just as vulnerable to betrayal and heartbreak as anyone else. Perhaps that's the most enduring lesson from Hollywood's golden era. Even at the height of the studio system's power to create and control public narratives, the messy realities of human relationships remained beyond anyone's ability to script or direct. If you've enjoyed this look into Hollywood's hidden history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories from cinema's golden age. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on these revelations and which Hollywood legends you'd like to learn more about. Until next time, thanks for watching.